Hi, I'm LadyJenevia, and today's video is a spoiler review of The Boys Season 3, Episode 7. Did I, or did I not say, this episode was going to have a lot going on? Where to even begin? Let's just rip the band-aid off. The deep. The octopus gag, it's not funny to me. If you ever found it funny, cool, good for you. For being able to derive some sort of entertainment out of it. I personally would have rather that screen time been used to get a deeper exploration of Maeve instead of being subjected to the same octopus joke twice when we could be watching literally anything else instead. And this man has some nerve talking to his wife the way that he did when she's the only reason he's gotten as far as he has this season. She's the one with some intelligence. Now that he scared her off, let's just see how badly he flounders now. Except I don't want to see that because I would rather he just be written off. Give him a funny death scene and let's just be done with it. Moving on to the thing that I said was going to feel eerily timely given the air date of this episode and what else is going on in the news. We now know where Maeve is. She's being held captive at Vought. Not that anyone is all that surprised by that revelation, but what is a big revelation is that Homelander wants to harvest her eggs in order to make perfect superhero children. Just nastiness with the eugenics of it all. Someone needs to save Maeve, and Annie is apparently the only one making any sort of effort to do so. It's deeply unsettling to watch a deeply corrupt political institution parade itself as democracy while taking away the bodily autonomy of millions upon millions of people, and then proceed to scam the people who aren't as politically cognizant of how this system works by sending out mass emails and texts trying to fundraise for the midterm elections. If any of you watching this are considering giving those people money, don't. They're already stealing enough money from taxes to increase the annual military budget to over $800 billion a year. It's definitely a topic that I could say more about, naturally, but there are so many characters to get through in this episode, so let me just say, because it bears repeating, do not give the political establishment your hard-earned wages for donations. They're not interested in helping you. If you can and want to donate to something, donate to Planned Parenthood or to bail funds for protesters who are putting themselves in danger on the front lines for the betterment of the people at large, while the elites are only looking out for each other. So now let's move on to another member of the Seven, A-Train. The major development in his story is not only the fact that he is alive, but also the fact that he got a heart transplant. And more specifically, he now has Blue Hawk's heart beating in his chest. And I love this development for A-Train. He now not only gets his speed back and won't have to worry about collapsing all the time, so if he ever decides to go full-on anti-hero and turn against Vought, he will be battle ready. But on top of that, since he is now physically connected to Blue Hawk, it's going to give him the space for writers to do a lot psychologically and emotionally, exploring the fallout of everything that happened for him with Blue Hawk and with his brother. I also had a strong reaction to them blaming Blue Hawk's death on Soldier Boy, not because I care about Soldier Boy being a scapegoat for something that he didn't do, but I don't think it's fair for A-Train to not get credit for his legendary behavior. You took out a fascist. You deserve the credit for it. Not only that, you deserve a parade. I keep seeing skeptics in my comments when it comes to A-Train, and I've been trying to tell all of you that this is great material for him as a character all season. Regardless of how you have felt about him before, the trajectory is excellent now. As far as I'm concerned, Huey experienced character assassination this season. I really am not a fan of his at this point. Maeve has been so thoroughly dropped and disregarded for these episodes, 1 through 7, that it's almost like she's barely even on the show. It's only really been for utilitarian material for her in these episodes. She is a vehicle to transport Temp V to Butcher. That's about it. A-Train has completely lapped both of these people. You can stay mad about it, but I'm just calling it like I see it. The only thing I want to point out about MM's material this week is less to do with him in regards to the writing or the performance, but instead the set design. I hate it. Or more specifically, I hate one very specific detail about it. If you look in the background of this episode, you will see on MM's wall a picture of Huey Newton, who was the founder of the Black Panther Party. And I love that. I love the Black Panthers. I love that there's a shout out to them. All good in that regard. But then the other person on that wall is Barack Obama, the guy who drone striked Doctors Without Borders in 2015, the man who ordered a CIA drone strike in Yemen in 2011, which resulted in the death of a 16-year-old child, Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki, and I'm really sorry for the clumsy pronunciation of that. I don't speak Arabic, and I've never done any type of formal studying of the language, and those are by no means the only deaths on his hands. But the point remains that this show is apparently now wanting to lionize a man whose parents worked for the CIA. That's why he was tapped to become this mascot of hope and change, and yes, we can, when absolutely nothing fundamentally changed. Obama had a supermajority, and did he codify Roe v. Wade? Not at all. All the reiterations I've made through this season's reviews about Operation Cyclone, where the CIA was arming and funding and training the Afghan Mujahideen, beginning in the 1970s under the Carter administration, but eventually became more closely associated with the Reagan administration because of how much longer Reagan was president for. So as such, there was more of an overlap with the timelines, and also those infamous photos of him with the Mujahideen in the White House. Well, guess what, folks? Obama ordered Operation Timber Sycamore in either 2012 or 2013. I've seen different dates from different sources, but either way, it was under his presidency. The CIA was given permission to do the largest op of arming and training of more Mujahideen than had been done since all the way back in the 1980s during Operation Cyclone. I could go on and on about Obama being a CIA war criminal, but there is a lot of other stuff to go through in the boys' plot in this episode, so I'm just going to link a very extensive article about this topic, which includes almost 30 citations of where the article is pulling its information from, so you are able to go through all of that yourself as much as you'd like and verify the information and where it's coming from. I want to reiterate that, again, I don't bring up these political points just because I feel like it. I bring them up because I consider them to be extremely relevant to the material of the show. You can see in the writing that there is a strong effort being made from the creative voices who shape the show's narrative to emphasize a multitude of socio-political topics, issues, legislation, culture, and historical things. I am not making the show political by bringing up politics when I review and discuss each week's new episode. The Boys as a show goes above and beyond, making every effort possible to be a political show and to address political topics. This is a fundamental pillar of the show's universe and story, which is why I'm even more critical of the lack of knowledge, the lack of due diligence in researching what it is that you are apparently aiming to talk about in your show. You've all seen that they made a point long before season 3 to show that Homelander went overseas and gave Compound V to extremists, jihadists, mujahideen, whatever term you feel to be the most accurate or palatable. And the motivation for Homelander doing that was to get Vought involved in the financially lucrative business of war. Vought wanted to get involved with military contracts. They wanted to be part of the giant business of war because ultimately it's all about money to them. If you look at the infographics of how much money the US government steals annually from taxpayers to funnel into their military budget and compare that military budget to the military budget of other countries, it's cartoonishly outlandish. So when I, as a viewer, see you putting a spotlight on this issue, I am going to now have expectations for all the episodes that follow that you will address these topics in your show's writing properly. And instead, what I see in season 3 is you inviting one of Hollywood's biggest CIA mascots to do a cameo in your fun little silly satire of the Imagine video. And now you want to make Obama, who was only #1 at one thing, drone strikes, as the backdrop aesthetic for a character you are attempting to position as someone who seemingly cares deeply about the empowerment of the Black community. The logic is nowhere to be found. But let's remove ourselves from this situation and move on to other unpleasant things. Billy Butcher. We finally got a more thorough exploration and explanation of who this person is and why they are the way that they are. We had already been informed about certain things pertaining to Butcher's backstory with his bad relationship with his father. That was when we got to see John Noble on the show, who is always excellent. Random tidbit that none of you asked for, but I will share it nonetheless. One time I saw John Noble at an airport, but he was further up in the queue when we were waiting to go through the border security checkpoint. So it wasn't even remotely an option to try to go up and say, hi, you're awesome. Airports are high-ranking locations that you don't want to act up in, lest you get yourself detained by very scary people. But anyway, I have a multitude of feelings about Butcher's backstory finally being presented in this way. I really liked the repeated emphasis of Butcher having visions of his little brother Lenny when he looks at Huey. Even if it is a bit on the nose visually, especially to do it so many times, I think sometimes you need to emphasize a point to the audience. Not everyone who watches the show is going to be as inclined towards really in-depth analysis and interpretation of the material. I think it's good at contextualizing what Becca had said to him back in season 2, where Billy Butcher has always had a problem of being full of rage for as long as she had known him, and her being with him and her loving him was never going to be a magical cure to fix that. My take is that, unsurprisingly, Butcher needs therapy, but I don't even necessarily think that that would work for him, because I don't think he's willing to do the work of introspection and trying to better himself as a person. It's certainly an interesting development in how the audience understands Butcher, but it's also not something I would classify as character development, because as a character, he has not grown or changed for the better. He still sucks, if you don't mind me saying it in a very informal way. I personally don't like Butcher, but I also think he doesn't exist as a character to be liked, nor do I think every character in fiction should be likable. I think he is a good character in the sense that he's well developed in the story. We get to learn a lot of things about him. He takes action that makes for a compelling viewing experience, but I'm very rarely rooting for him to get his way, because he is a hurt person doing considerable harm to the people around him, including those that are supposed to be his friends or family. Karl Urban is great, and I'm glad he's on the show, but at this point, I think that whatever season they eventually end the show on, whether it's season 5 or 6 or 7, I am currently of the belief that Butcher needs to die saving someone, whether it's saving Huey or Ryan or the entire crew of the boys as a team. I think that he needs to die in battle. Of course, I could change my mind in season 4 depending on how his story plays out, but just for now, with what we've seen so far, that's where I'm at with him as a character. Also, him and Homelander made a deal to fight to the death, and that's all Butcher has been focused on. Give the man what he wants. He can be the one to deal the death blow, but he should not survive in the process. You can make it very grand and operatic, very Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, except Butcher wouldn't get resurrected into a fabulous black supersuit. But also on a smaller note, I really don't like the accents for this corner of the universe in The Boys, especially with that flashback sequence. Why are US and UK entertainment companies so averse to hiring talent who have actual Cockney accents? Everyone on this show who does a Cockney accent sounds ridiculous. If you need to hear a fabulous Cockney accent, Danny Dyer is right there. Have you all seen that one clip of him yelling about David Cameron on television? He called him a twat on daytime television.
So what's happened to that twat David Cameron who called it on? Let's be fair.
Not a joke, just a fact.
He should be held accountable for it.
It's a valid point. A lot of people do feel
twat.
that...
Moving on now to Black Noir. This was such a fantastic development that I never could have imagined we would get to see. I had already looked up a bit of the trivia about the character years ago, where apparently in the comics, Black Noir as a character is a clone of Homelander, and to be quite frank, I was not fond of that idea being something to transfer to the show. I'm very pleased that the show ultimately decided to do something different. I'm also appreciative of the fact that they opted to show his backstory through the animation medium. For one, animators do not get enough credit or enough wages for that matter, but considering how violent Black Noir's backstory was with Soldier Boy, I would much rather see it play out in animation than with people. Emotionally, psychologically, I don't think I would have fared very well seeing it play with actual actors physically acting that out. But to briefly rewind, if you watched my spoiler-free video about this episode, you will have heard me mention that I recommended looking up Martin Brest, and Black Noir is the reason why. They mentioned that he was up for the lead role in Beverly Hills Cop. Martin Brest was the director of that film, which starred Eddie Murphy. Fun fact, by the way, Paul Reiser was in that film, and he's now appearing on The Boys this season as the legend. But anyway, I was happy that they gave a Martin Brest film a shout out, because I have kind of a lot of opinions on him. I've actually talked about him on my channel before. It was a while ago. I talked about how much I dislike the fact that he has been in director's jail and just completely MIA in the industry ever since lled came out. So lled, if you don't already know this, performed very poorly at the box office and with the critics. But what irritates me about that is that Martin Brest was getting blamed when it wasn't even his fault. He wanted to make the movie a certain way, but the studios, the higher ups, they were elbow deep in meddling with this film because they wanted to capitalize on the Bennifer hype of the early 2000s. You people up top screwed up the film, and now a perfectly capable director loses his career over it. Nope, don't like that. So even if it's in a subtle way, I am happy to hear some type of positive mention and association for Martin Brest on such a popular piece of entertainment media. I really love the film Meet Joe Black, which was a Martin Brest film. It's really emotionally moving and has one of the best scores of any film ever. So I know that more or less no one else cares about fixating on such a tiny detail as this in a review of The Boys, but it mattered to me. It further lifted a section of this episode that I was already enjoying, which was Black Noir's story. And I appreciated that there was an extra pick-me-up because I was feeling extremely sad for Black Noir as a character to have been subjected to such horrific violence at the hands of Soldier Boy. There's something so tragic about his character being entirely alone and lacking in connection to the people around him. But I will admit that when done well, I can appreciate a good tragedy. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about Annie, but also branch off to other characters because it's a challenge to try to keep everyone sectioned off, since a lot of the things these characters say or do are entangled with the stories of other characters. Annie exposing Homelander on her live stream, legendary behavior. She did what needed to be done. I don't fully understand why Annie tried to stay in Vought for as long as she did. You know, maybe she was naive enough to think that she could destroy it from the inside, but you're trying to level this thing into rubble, and you really want to stay inside the building while you're doing that? I'm just saying. But I love that she's finally ramping things up to go scorched earth when it comes to them as a company. She just keeps growing more super, more powerful in the sense of empowerment within herself to destroy this evil corporation, and I love that for her. The disrespect Homelander has been putting on her name, far too much. And that actually brings us to one of the points I was hinting at in my spoiler-free video, which I can now explain. I mentioned how some of the things in Homelander's material have been done in such a way where he's meant to be symbolic of certain critiques of 45, and that there was another character in this show that was being treated as symbolic of a different political figure, and that I didn't like the execution because it was done in such a way where you're making it out to be that the political figure being referenced isn't actually that bad. Well, I have to give props to one of my commenters on that review, if I can find the screenshot. I don't know what your username is, since if I recall correctly, you didn't appear to have one, but you did in fact guess it correctly. And to be fair, this was a plot detail that had already been introduced in some capacity, but they pushed it even more in this episode with Todd, whom I would assume we can all agree is terrible. Todd is a Homelander stan, and he's clearly meant to be symbolic of a 45 stan. Homelander was throwing out these allegations that Annie traffics kids. We all see on the show, Annie does not do that. And being that this accusation Homelander is making is now being parroted by his very aggressive stans, it's very obvious that this particular part of this storyline is supposed to position Annie to be symbolic of Killery. And I'm insulted on Annie's behalf. Why are you out here slandering Annie's good name with that comparison? We've all seen how good of a person Annie is. She is so deeply heroic, and she's out here trying to help so many people, even when they cannot or will not help themselves. She brought Maeve back from the brink of nihilistic self-destruction. She's the only one trying to save Huey. Not even Huey is really trying to save Huey, or he's not very good at it anyway. And what has Killery done? Cackle on television over murdering Qaddafi because the US wanted to steal his large reserves of gold that he had planned on using to create a gold-based currency for economically poor countries in Africa to use so they could be liberated from dependency on colonial French currency.
We came, we saw, he died. Did it have anything to do with your visit? No, I'm sure it did.
Before she, as part of the Obama administration, destroyed Libya, Libya had been the most prosperous country in Africa with the highest standard of living, and to this day, over a decade later, Libya still has not come anywhere close to recovering as a country. She also supported the fascist 2009 coup in Honduras. She has a lengthy track record of corruption, both in her own political career, but also stuff that is deeply entangled with her husband, whom I'm also not a fan of. And if you want to know why, you can first start by asking the people of Yugoslavia why it is that I would not like him. If I went through the many infractions of Hillary or her husband, this video would be at least 7 hours long. So I will just add some more articles to the list of links in the description box for this episode for you to dig into and hopefully do your own research and explore, who that person really is. And again, I have to reiterate, it's disappointing to see a show like The Boys be one of the most outspoken shows to address so many important socio-political issues and topics, and then immediately go and get multiple things so horrifically wrong. I'm not a fan of 45. I don't have a problem with you making him out to be the bad guy. But to not keep that same energy for the war criminals of both of the major political parties in the US is hypocritical. If you really oppose war, you will oppose war no matter who perpetuates it. Anyway, I know all of this is a lot, so let's jump over to some fun stuff to break up this funk we find ourselves in. Jensen Ackles in a floral robe. It was a moment for everyone. I want to hear from the Jensen fans about what the big reveal was for the thing that Jensen had been repeatedly talking about in interviews regarding Eric messing with him. I'm kind of mixed on the reveal for that, to be quite honest. I just don't love the idea of using women's bodies, especially older women, for shock value. What is the humor in it that Soulja Boy wants to be involved with some older women who appear to have been consenting? I don't know. We didn't see the lead up to that situation, so I don't know if he threatened them. That would be a whole other conversation to have if that was the case. But at least from the small glimpse we got of this dalliance, it seemed like all parties were consenting. And if that's the case, who cares? They're all adults. They can do whatever they want to do. It just feels like there's some sort of misogynistic undertone running through it. But if we can get past that part of the scene, it's really all about the robe, isn't it? It's the floral robe. Was that his robe? Did Soulja Boy go out and buy himself a floral robe? Or did the legend have that robe for himself and Soulja Boy just appropriated it? So many questions. Anyone want to write a short fic about Soulja Boy luxuriating in his floral robe? Have at it. Send me the link on Twitter. But anyway, he, Butcher, and Huey are on the hunt for Mindstorm. And I don't care if it's petty. I think it's very funny that Soulja Boy smacked Huey. That's what you get for aligning yourself with a boomer war criminal. You got yourself hit. Also, a nice touch to have Soulja Boy invoke Sean Connery's name, because that man was a nasty, abusive person who repeatedly emphasized that he supported the physical assault of women, and so many people just didn't care about it. But I did say that Huey was less annoying in this episode, and I do stand by that. What Huey doesn't seem to understand about himself is that his heart is his biggest strength. When he was able to help to calm Mindstorm, a mentally ill person who clearly needed help, that made me feel like, there's the Huey I know. There's the Huey I got invested in over the first 2 seasons. I get that you want to make your character struggle so that they can persevere and overcome, and the show has done that in ways that I enjoy. Having him be a pretty innocent character and be pushed to the edge, where he pushed the button to detonate Translucent, that was interesting and compelling to watch. But this season has just not been it for me when it comes to Huey as a character. I hope they get him back on track for season 4, but for now, he's still estranged from me. But of course, one of the biggest developments for this cluster of characters was Soulja Boy finding out that he's Homelander's father. I don't know how many of you will remember this, but a few weeks back, I don't remember exactly for which episode it was, but I made a comment in one of my reviews about Jensen Ackles' Soulja Boy, and I think I said something like, "Daddy's home," and I can now tell you that I was 100% just being sneaky and entertaining myself by saying that, knowing all the while that eventually everyone was going to find out that he's Homelander's father. I don't think I normally make that a part of how I review things when I've watched press screeners, but the masses have not yet seen everything. But the opportunity just seemed too funny to pass up. It was actually the same thing for the spoiler-free review video of Herogasm, where I said something about the episode making a splash. Someone in my comments thought I was talking about The Deep, but I was actually talking about MM. I know, I know it's a terrible joke to make at his expense, but I don't feel bad about it. So yes, Soldier Boy is Homelander's father. I know what my feelings are about this development in the story and in the show's canon, but I can't fully express them until after episode 8 airs. So let me know what you thought of this plot development, because I would be very interested to hear what people's thoughts and reactions were when seeing it for the first time. And one extra historical tidbit that I would like to mention to do with Soldier Boy, that thing where he's pretending to have fought the Nazis, but he didn't really. It felt unintentionally very accurate. When I heard that line, my reflex response was to go, no way, no you didn't, not unless you were actually fighting in the Red Army. Seeing as how the Red Army was the one to enact around 80% of the Nazi casualties in World War II, but the US hates to give them credit for it. They want to make it seem like they were the heroes of that global war, as opposed to being the ones who launched Operation Paperclip. The Soviet Union was the one holding it down and defeating all those fascist countries and their invasions when they were allying with each other. Operation Barbarossa was a flop. The world in general just needs to be more appreciative of the Soviet heroes for all that they did to fight the rise of fascism. Anyway, Jensen was really good in this episode. I like the part where he tells Butcher and Huey to not look Mindstorm in the eye, but then he downplays why he's giving that advice to them. But then once he turns around, his face shifts. I love stuff like that. For as much work as actors put into learning and delivering their lines, I love the nuances of how a great actor will emote when they don't have dialogue. Now, as always, we've got to close things off with the stars of this show, Kimchie, but mostly Kimiko. I am so happy that we finally got to see Kimiko and Annie interacting again. I loved that moment back in season 2 when Kimiko hugged Annie and then they made us wait all this time for more friendship content between them. This is also why I'm so exasperated by the audacity of Eric Kripke for trying to gaslight us into thinking Frenchie and Kimiko kissing was weird. Eric Kripke, I will buy a megaphone so you never know the sound of silence again until you stop this nonsense. Frenchie and Kimiko's relationship does not need to be platonic because Annie can be Kimiko's best platonic friend. Frenchie is her boyfriend, and I will not be told otherwise. Kimiko was deprived of the normalcy of her childhood and adolescence, but now she gets to have her first drink with her best gal pal Annie. And if Annie has really quit the Seven, then I want her to be more fully integrated into the boys as a group of revolutionaries trying to bring down Vought, so then we can get more gal pal content in season 4. But of course, the most moving part of Kimiko's story in this episode was all that good mushy stuff with Frenchie. They finally got to have their dance. I know we had that cute musical number, but to be honest, I preferred this dance in episode 7 because it's real and we got to see them emotionally open themselves up to each other so much more. She chose to take Compound V again because she needed to ensure that she would be able to protect Frenchie. And why would she want to do that? Oh, because she loves him. I don't know why Eric Kripke is so stubbornly determined to torture Kimchie shippers with this wishy-washy nonsense of trying to act like, well, they love each other, but also no. She would do anything for him. All of you love watching them make heart eyes at each other. But anyway, here's 3 more hours of Huey and Annie arguing again. I saw how big the reaction was online when Kimiko tackled Frenchie this season with a hug. Meanwhile, Annie and Huey hooked up in episode 1, and how much noise did that make? Nowhere to be found. So little noise that if we were collecting data, theirs would have been thrown out for being an outlier on the lower end of things. Still, it's nice to see that Kimiko has gotten her powers back, but this time it was her choice. The US government might not respect the bodily autonomy of women, but at least on this show, there is at least one woman who gets to decide for herself what she does with her body. I have more thoughts about the future of Kimiko as a character when it comes to her powers, but I will wait till after the finale to maybe elaborate more on that. I still want to reiterate my frustrations with this development in Frenchie and Kimiko's relationship though. Calling the kiss weird, the same kiss that fans of this couple have been waiting years to see, and then having her say, we're so much more than that, is so insulting and belittling to the romance genre and fans of romance in fiction. The rom-com genre used to be a massive pillar of show business, but somewhere along the way it just kind of died out and has never gotten to those same heights since. Why is it that finding romantic love isn't treated as a joyous occasion? This is why I can only count on Baz Luhrmann. What did he do? He put a giant spotlight on the song lyric, "The greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to be loved and be loved in return," and got his film nominated for an Oscar for it. Iconic behavior. If love isn't such a big deal, why am I bombarded every season with relationship drama between Huey and Annie? Or do you, Eric Kripke, simply not believe that Japanese women should get to have their romantic endgame too? This honestly feels like watching Pacific Rim all over again, and I've had enough. If you're not a Kimchie shipper, I frankly don't really care about your dismissive sentiments about their relationship and you thinking that it's a good idea to put them in my comments. I've been filtering those out for years. But if you are a Kimchie shipper, I want you to chime in the comments, just because I don't know if I just don't trust these lines because I'm used to getting burned when it comes to my ships, or if they're really messing with us as badly as I think they are when it comes to this pairing. For all the pop culture references The Boys as a show seems to be aware of, did you miss the part where one of the biggest shows in the entire world for almost 2 years now is Bridgerton? People want romance. Let Kimchie be in love without attaching an asterisk to it. There's probably more I could say about any number of the plot developments in this episode, but this review is already extremely long, so I'm going to just close things off here. So let me know what your thoughts are about this episode and actual daddy, Soldier Boy. The drama of it all is so much fun. We've got one more week of coverage of this show, so stay tuned for that. Also, if you've made it this far, I was thinking about doing an extra video to post after episode 8 airs that would just be about Soldier Boy, because I feel like I've had a few extra tidbits to say about him, and I think my review of episode 8 will already be very long, so if you would like me to follow through on that idea, let me know, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.